Um, all right, so welcome everyone to Imirt Inspire. I'm Colin Larkin, and today we have Adam Saltsman. Hi, Adam.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for
So,
having me.
thank you. We can see right into your bathroom. You pointed that out before we started recording, so
Yes,
that's
which
cool.
just a bathroom, and there's a closet,
So you are
and
in
yeah.
a bedroom. You're a bedroom coder.
For the last couple of months, very 100% literally a bedroom coder, except when we can sneak out to the cafe.
That's cool. So
It's good.
you channeling the 80s there.
A little bit, a little bit.
Um,
Uh,
So I usually start things out with basically like a mini history. So how did you find yourself in the games industry? What started you out?
um, Well, pretty normal way, I guess. I went to school for um, film and computer programming, and then uh, I interned at like a nonprofit um internet company thing, and then I worked at a photography software company for a couple of years, and then I guess ended up picking up mostly like freelance work. I've been doing like my own weird, like um, I don't know what the right word is for it, but basically making like first-person shooter mods and stuff like that for a long time, and was trying to make games in 2D game engines in C++ and kind of not really getting anywhere. And then started doing freelance work. I worked
Around
on,
around when was that you were kind of tooling around with stuff?
I probably started modding like Wolfenstein and Doom starting in, uh, oh gosh, it would have been middle school. So I was probably like 10, so like the
Wow.
mid-early 90s maybe. Um, just like making weird levels. I ordered a Doom level editor uh, through the mail. Like I put a check, like a paper check in an envelope and sent it through the mail, and then they sent me physical discs in an envelope. So I could have a good like Doom vector level editor. That was pretty life-changing. Um,
And did you then try and share any of the levels you made? Doom
um,
Doom eventually
Kind of only
released a
like,
collection of user-made levels as it
yeah, it was
like
really
sold it.
just like a very local thing. Like I would, put the levels on like a 3.5-inch disc and like take them to a friend's house. Um, because we would make levels that were based on like our house floor plan or our high school or whatever, which probably would get you arrested now,
Yeah.
but whatever, it was fine. Um, yeah, so we did that, and but it was like I feel like it was a really weird time to want to make video games because everything was like I feel like if I was born like 5 or 10 years earlier, I would have had like a Commodore or an Amiga or something,
What
and
what
just
what was your first computer? PC?
I don't know, yeah, some random 386 type machine probably,
Sure.
or 286 machine even. So I was exposed to like we had like some King's Quest games and some other things like that, but it was like the how do I get from zero to moving stuff around on the screen was like really weird. It was like doing little experiments in like QBasic or Visual Basic or something like that. There wasn't the um, I sometimes feel like there was like it feels like there was a period in like British computing especially where you had your computer, you get a computer magazine, and in the back it had code, and you could
Yeah,
copy code into the computer, and then it would play a game, and then you could
and you
like
can kind of tweak
that's
it.
how I learned. Yeah, that's how I've always learned. I made a graphical drawing application for my graphing calculator on a road trip one time, just like trial and erroring and looking in the manual for
Wow.
things, but it wasn't really clear how to do that with like a DOS 286 or 386 computer felt like totally impenetrable to me for some reason. Um, I don't know what it was, but it kind of felt like bad timing, but then modding games felt very immediate for some reason. It felt like you could just load up the software and move things around and they could run around this space, and that felt really cool.
Because before that, you mentioned that we had a 386 and a 486, but before that we had a ZX Spectrum, and that came with BASIC bundled, and like you said,
Yeah,
you'd get magazines that had code and really simple code. Well,
yeah,
you're right. I never tried to make a game on MS-DOS basically.
yeah, and the basic that was on there is all basically macros for assembly. So it's like it's really, really on the metal. And I think if you grew up programming when I did, assembly was like a boogeyman or something. It'd be like, oh, if you're naughty, you have to learn assembly because it's so hard. But assembly is actually like very physical and practical and um, uh, visual almost. It's like there are pieces like assembly is like, hey, we need to talk to um, these like bits of metal that are holding like an electrical charge, and we have to move them around, and that's like uh,
Scary to me.
well, it sounds scary, but it's also like it's so not abstract. Like it's so concrete. And so it's like it's hard to do anything complicated with it, but you don't have to have several layers of like abstract understanding in order to engage with it. So anyway, I don't know. Maybe this is a grass is always greener thing too, because like I got to make lots of Doom levels and that was awesome. So like did that for a while, and then
So that was always a hobby, though. You know,
yeah, it was hard to do anything with it. Like we had a very well-intentioned but bro-y like Half-Life mod that we tried to get off the ground in college. So we were looking at projects like Science and Industry and Natural Selection and Counter-Strike, and eventually even like the Stanley Parable,
mm,
and looking at like, wow, like look at these cool express like modding. It felt like modding at some point became really legitimate, and then like Dota started to happen out of that. Like there was this, it felt like heyday for modding, and we were in the middle of that. So
Team
that
Fortress.
was, yeah, yeah, exactly. So we were right in the middle of that, and that felt really cool. But I just like didn't do anything worthwhile with it. We were like, let's make Space Marines, and they can have lots and lots of different real-life guns with really high-resolution textures. Um, so did that for quite a while. Um, and that didn't really turn into anything. I tried to get work as an artist, and nobody would hire me. And so I started just doing programming for a software company, but that was actually like super satisfying because it was very like end to end. So like I worked, I got to help design the software and program it and ship it and test it and install it and do all of that stuff. So it was actually like, even though it wasn't games, I was doing a lot of UI and UX stuff, and I had a lot of control over the final quality of the stuff that I was building. So that felt like really satisfying, and it started to suck after a couple years because I wasn't in charge of my ship quality anymore. And that's when I started doing freelance work, which led into eventually making our own games and stuff.
So around when was that when you were doing freelance game work?
We started doing freelance full-time in about 2006, and I think I started freelancing on the side in 2005. My first official game industry gig was making little little tiny buildings for Microsoft Flight Simulator. So like at first it was just like random apartment buildings. They would send you uh, like photos of like, hey, there's this noticeable apartment building in Tokyo, and we need a 3D model of it to put in our otherwise kind of lazily projection mapped part of the city. Like you have to
So
have these
just
like
so it
handmade
looks like
buildings that are, yeah, it has to have like a little bit of normal mapping and stuff like that. So I started working on those, and it went really well, and I eventually sort of got quote unquote promoted to working on like the really noticeable buildings. So I did a lot of like the sort of like global landmark buildings in the game eventually, which is a really weird. Um,
so like the Eiffel Tower, that kind of stuff.
I did like the Taj Mahal
Yeah,
and a lot of the New York skylines, like the Statue of Liberty. That was pretty tricky. Um, and like the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, um, and a couple other things like that. It was weird. It was that was like the first game industry work that I did, and I think that was in like 2005. And I did a lot of pixel art for mobile games, um, especially for T-Mobile Sidekick, which was like a pre-iPhone
the sideways
cross-site
one.
gaming thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was actually kind of a neat piece of hardware. It just had really low refresh rates and some other things that were kind of limiting in some ways. But I liked it. I like
That,
those platforms that are compact and limited.
that was running Java, I think,
I think
or was it
so.
something else? Because there was
Uh,
meanwhile in Europe there was a lot of kind of Java enabled smartphones that
yes, yeah,
all
yeah, yeah.
disappeared right afterwards.
Yeah, so I did that stuff for a couple of years and had some really weird contracts and side jobs. And somewhere in the middle of that, I had, after a couple of years, I got a gig to make a game engine in Silverlight, so sort of an advertising project for Microsoft when they were trying to
Cool,
make
yeah.
Silverlight into a thing. And um, the 2D game engine that I built for that was based on the kind of failed C++ game engine I had tried to design right after school. It was based on a C++ game engine I had used in school, and that Silverlight game engine is what Flixel was based on, weirdly.
And did you finish that? Did they publish that?
The
The
Silverlight
Silverlight?
thing was published, yeah. It
What,
did not
what
catch
was it
on,
called?
as you might imagine.
Silver Flixel.
I don't even think it had a. It wasn't even like a branded thing necessarily. It was just like we made like a little platforming game, but it was all open source, so people could grab it. And people made a few other like miscellaneous 2D games in it, but it was just such a tiny platform with no audience.
Yeah. It's just another one of those half pushed out, not quite
Yeah,
all in Microsoft things.
yeah.
But actually, I want to talk to you about Flixel a lot. So I started seriously trying to make games in 2008 in Flash, and I
Hmm.
think the year after that you released the first version of Flixel, 2009, 2010.
Yeah, so I started making games in Flash in 2007, I think,
And Flash blew
and
up. It had been this amazing toy to make kind of games in, but suddenly there was a way to make money, and it kind of grew up with online advertising because there were portals with Flash games making money. Suddenly
yeah,
they could afford to pay
there
people.
were two or three really weird things that happened. There was for a while, Flash was the only way to do interactive real-time anything on the web, um, uh, and so and nobody knew how to do anything cool in it. So the people that did know how to do something cool in it, like um, there was like a supply and demand thing. So like if you made a cool Flash game back in like 2006 or 2007, somebody might come up to you and be like, "I'll pay you $50,000 for that Flash game," because like nobody could make anything cool. So like uh, I think there was some growth from that. The other thing that was happening is I think people were just enjoying making interactive stuff because what ended up becoming Haxi. That project started as a sort of third-party Flash compiler because Adobe's Flash compiler was so bad. And so people who were doing a lot of online interactive work, like advertising studios and some game developers, they had all swapped out their Adobe toolchains to use this other ActionScript 2 compiler because it was way, way, way faster and it produced way better code and it had more features. And
Adobe are also
then
super spotty in their support there, Flash. They're always like, I guess it's still going, or is it?
super spotty. So there was this third-party compiler thing, and then Unity Web Player started to happen, and finally Adobe was like, well, we'll do a nice update, and that's when ActionScript 3 happened, and that's when I started really enjoying making Flash games because you could write your own 2D blitting pipeline, and you could make these really smooth
And
kind of
fast.
performative web game things.
And
Yeah,
get
it
away
was
from
really
the weird,
cool.
the weird Flash look of Vector.
Yeah,
That kind of
yeah, which you
haunted
could
Flash
always
for a long
sort of
time.
sneak away from, but it was really weird, and uh, the ActionScript 3 just opened up a
So,
lot of cool things with manipulating the graphics on the screen, which, I don't know, it was really fun.
and that's specifically what Flixel does. It's 2D bitmap blitting engine, or
Hmm.
maybe library even, for games. It does things really quickly. I started using it for game jams. So for me, it
Yeah,
just let me be productive really quickly. It did a lot of basic stuff for me. That was great.
yeah. I built it for that because I just didn't have a lot of. So it was a weird thing. So there was like 2005, around 2005 is when I first played Cave Story, which was like very. Uh, I still feel weird saying like, oh, caves. Like I don't know if it's something that's inherent in Cave Story. I still have a soft spot for this kind of game. Like Axiom Verge is probably the modern equivalent of Cave
Mm.
Story. Like one person working on every aspect of a single game. I think when Konjak's new game comes out, I forgot what it's called already. Which that's a good sign. But he's another creator who does this, where he does the graphics and the animation and the music and the programming and the level design and the world design, like everything. And I think that when people do that, even when one or more of those components are individually lacking in some way. So I've heard people probably rightly criticize some of the sound effect design uh, in um, in Axiom Verge, and I was really turned off by the pixel art in Axiom Verge, because pixel art was a thing that I still take pretty seriously, and that was
It's quite
something that helped
lowbrow.
pay our bills for a long time, and I thought it looked shoddy, basically. Um, and I think you could say like, oh, well, Cave Story is just a Metroid clone and something, 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 but like there I think it's like a forest for the trees thing. Like the big picture of Axiom Verge is that everything in the game fits together, and it's this like super unsettling, like Roger Dean kind of vibe. And I think that's really, really cool. And Cave Story was like that for me too. It was like so melancholy, and um, even though some of the gameplay was familiar, there are things about the gameplay that are weird. Like your floaty jumps are like really, really strange. Um, and there's just all these cool things going on. The art is really expressive, and the color palettes seem really pretty considered, and there's all this world building and mystery and sadness and all of these things. So I played that in 2005. It was like, look at this, one person can make a game that's a lot like the games that made a big impression on me when I was a kid. And so maybe I want to do this, maybe I can do this. And then ActionScript 3 came out eventually, and it was like, I think we could do this. I think this is possible. I think there's stuff that we did in the game engine for Silverlight, and there's stuff in ActionScript 3. And I basically started trying to make a game engine that I thought you could make Cave Story in quickly,
Hmm.
which was not a goal that I met, but the thing that came out of it was really useful anyway. Because the idea was I have to do a lot of contract work in order to pay the bills. Um, and so probably I'm only going to get a few days a month to work on my own projects. And so if those are the constraints of how I get to work, then I need a tool that can produce something um, that I will find satisfying in that time frame. So almost everything about designing Flixel was like, how quickly can you get from nothing to a little arcade game with some cute pixel art?
And
Because I like, there can't be any startup time because I don't have that.
and that's exactly how that worked well for me for game jams, because it's exactly what you described. Though I have to say, designing your own engine to do that sounds like a time sink.
Yeah, and in the past it had been. The Silverlight engine went pretty well because I was able to repurpose code from this big bloated, utterly failed like C++ Python OpenGL project. Um, so the methodology, that sounds like way more intentional than it should be, but the methodology behind designing Flixel was to not build a game engine, but to build progressively more complex games starting from almost nothing and just only reuse, like only keep the things that you end up reusing each time. So the very first Flixel game was like they were like a little spaceship, and you could, it was like a little bit like Gradius or something. And there was like one enemy type, and there was one player spaceship type, and there was like two scrolling background layers, and there was like one bullet sprite, and you just fly and shoot things, and it would go on forever. There was no way to win. It was not even like, it wasn't even like an endless game. It was like, it was, I don't
Maybe
know
more
what
like
it
a demo.
was. Yeah, if that, if that. And it still had like an idea in it. There was this idea that when you kill the bad guys, they drop power-ups for you, but the power-ups float toward the top of the screen, which is where the bad guys come from, and maybe that was kind of interesting. And it was, but everything else about the game was like, oh, this is going to take forever. No, why does anyone make a game like this? You have to make all these bad guys and backgrounds, and it's going to be terrible. Um, but I wrote a little bit of code for that, and then I ended up having like a frame rate problem. So that was the first version of trying to fix frame rate dependent stuff, which I carried over to the next prototype.
So like the
And then
time
the next
step,
prototype,
doing that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Because Flash was
The
always
earliest version.
really variable frame
Yeah,
rate
yeah, yeah,
wise.
really super unpredictable. And current version of Flixel has a pretty modern, almost threaded approach to managing that stuff, which is nice. But yeah, there wasn't a lot going on in that game aside from it could load pixel art from a file. Was almost the only thing that was in that. And it had a little bit of management stuff maybe. And then there was a game that I didn't really release, which was like a Silent Scope clone. And that had a couple of other things going on where I needed to do actual sprite animation. So I wanted to be able to specify, like, display this image, then this image, then this image. And then I think Gravity Hook was the game we did after that, which included a few other little, very minor utilities. I was still, like, cheating a lot. Like, your actual grapple in Gravity Hook isn't a set of sprites or anything. It's just like a flash line being drawn on the screen buffer. Um, and then I think I don't remember if it was fall, it must have been like spring of 2009, I made a weird art game called Fathom that actually is kind of directly riffing on Cave Story. And that was where it started to feel like, oh hey, this weird 2+ years long quest to slowly assemble the minimum number of moving parts that you can use to create something like Cave Story. I think I'm almost there. And then it was sometime that summer, I think. So yeah, it would have been 2009
So
when the
these were
first version of
still,
Flixel
you
came
were
out.
still releasing these for free as Flash games, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Just web-based
And
games.
Canabalt was September 2009, and that was free Flash game also.
And that is probably the first one that blew up, right?
Yeah, Gravity Hook got some web traffic, but it didn't go crazy. And Canabalt went pretty nuts. I think my first month's server overages for Canabalt was like, I don't remember. It was really expensive. It was like hundreds of dollars of bandwidth.
Back when releasing a game costs you money instead of making you money.
Uh, yeah, it racked up. I want to say it was like $1,200 of server
Wow.
overages or something. Because the game itself is tiny. Cannonball without music is like a 75 kilobyte game or something. But
Should have been without music and paid $1 for
yeah,
version.
yeah, yeah. Well, they were like, I didn't know how to do Amazon or anything. Like, so I eventually rigged up a thing where I had like a switch that I could browse to on my like phone, and I could press a button. I could like log into it. Like I had like a CMS that would basically flip my all of my flash files to be served off of an Amazon server instead of off of my
And that
thing.
gave you
So if I
cheaper bandwidth, basically? Yeah.
yeah, I would basically serve everything off of my servers, which had free bandwidth up to X. And as soon
Yeah.
as I saw it creeping up there, then I'll flip the switch and send it over to Amazon. Um,
So Canabalt is a kind of endless runner, basically. Kind of sort of invented endless running, actually. And it's really cool
it
look.
definitely popularized it. I
Yeah.
think it was push it back into the spotlight a little bit, I guess.
And I remember the web game when it first came out was huge. Everyone was playing it. Did you put ads on that eventually, or have any even a donation button
Um,
on the web-based version?
The web-based version did get donate buttons eventually. It produced very, very, very little revenue. I did put an ad on the title screen of the web-based version for the iPhone version, and I think that helped some.
So for
And
iPhone,
I did sell ads on the Canabalt landing page, but they weren't in the actual game.
sure.
Um,
The
but it
iPhone
was
version you
very
made like
specific.
right afterwards,
Yeah, it was like basically less than a month.
and you had to
Um,
build that with, Objective-C.
It's just native. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just an Objective-C.
There was no other really option for iOS games back then.
Yeah, and like it was like really simple. It's like I don't know. There's just not there, especially that first version. There wasn't a lot of. There's not that much that happens in the game. We built it out later. We added more obstacles and stuff like that. But for the iPad launch, I think.
And you were allowed to charge money for the iOS version, like $1 or $2.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it was really weird because we had I worked on a top 10 iPhone app in 2008, and sort of co-developed / published it or whatever, and we did no marketing for it, no effort went into any of that stuff, and it organically became a top 10 app, and it was. So this wasn't like the first time we'd done one of these mobile launches, but yeah, it was weird. I don't know.
okay, it was really early. Like
Oh,
the App
that's what
Store
was
was
weird
not
about it
known.
is, yeah. So the App Store basically started happening in like early 2008, I think, mid 2008 maybe. And so our first game that we released was like right at the start of things, and we were really scared that nobody would play it because I was worried because I had never done a game that we were selling before. I had just done these free web games. And so we priced it for $199, and we actually got a lot of flack for underpricing it from other people that were on the store, and they were like, "What are you doing? It's
They were
a
trying to
waste of
be
time or money."
5, 10, like regular game
Yeah,
prices.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're like, "Well, we don't know what we're doing," and
So
I
it's
had
your
done. I
fault.
felt
It's your fault that
well, I
we're all
felt better
making
after a
free-to-play
while.
games.
Yeah, because that game was a clone of Boggle, which I didn't know because I had never played Boggle.
That's right. I
Uh,
actually heard you talking about this at
so
something you
bad.
did at GDC. I think an
It
interview with
was,
GameSpot.
it was
Really
so
into it.
bad.
So someone
But
pitched you on this dice game, and you had never played Boggle, and you're like, "That's a cool design. I'll make it."
yeah, and I essentially, my first iOS project is I cloned a popular board game and priced it really low and like made a bunch of money on it. Like I'm the worst.
So
The
You are to blame for the iOS of today.
Pretty much. So, but when Canabalt came out, we were like, what's a good, I don't know, like $3. What's a good non-price for this game that people are really positively responding to? And we got so much flack for overpricing it.
And that was just the difference of it, what, a year? Because
Yeah, it was almost
yeah,
exactly 12 months. And it was the first time on the Touch Arcade forums that there was outrage over a mobile game's price.
that's hilarious.
Um,
Because it was $3.
yeah, and
Yeah.
people were furious. Uh, they were like really upset. I don't know, it was weird.
Flight
uh,
Control had been a hit that year. I'm just looking up the dates here. I don't know them all off the
oh
top of my
yeah,
head.
no,
But that was a hit at like $1. So that was probably that had anchored $1 as a price point.
yeah, it was a lot had changed. Like it was less than 12 months for the expected price to go from $4.99 to 99 cents.
Wow.
It was really fast.
I actually blame Apple because there was only one chart, which was the top, like most sold. That was it.
Mhm.
So obviously,
Yeah,
no matter what price you are, the lower the better to get in the chart.
pretty much. Pretty much. It was weird. But yeah, and the Canabalt launch was kind of funny too because we didn't have any contacts at Apple, even though our our other game had done really well the year before. Everything at Apple was crazy, and they were understaffed and kind of still are. And we didn't know who to email, and I didn't even know that that was a thing that we should do. And so we started like a Twitter campaign that was basically like, hey, if and Twitter was new-ish at the time, back in 2009. We were basically like, hey, if you've been playing Cannibal and liking it, and we had Twitter integration for posting your little epitaphs
That's
in
right.
the web game because we thought that would be funny, and it kind of was. And do little, I guess they call that like viral engagement or something now, but it mostly just seemed neat at the time. But we were like, hey, if you like Cannibal, it's going to come out on this Friday or whatever. Please, everyone buy it on Friday. If you're going to buy it, don't buy it on Thursday or Saturday. Buy it on Friday. Because if we do that, then we'll get onto the top seller charts. Because we'll
Because
get
there was no,
everyone who was going to
yeah.
buy it to buy it in such a short amount of time that would appear to be very popular.
Then that worked.
It totally worked. It didn't get us super high on the charts. We never made it, like Canabalt was never a top 10 app or anything like that, but it got us high enough. It was pretty cool.
That's cool.
And it
I
got us, it
What I
did well enough
assumed it
on its
was.
own that when we did the iPad launch, we were actually able to coordinate with Apple, and we actually had a really good working relationship with Apple for years after that. It's weird.
So I have a question from Bob Lewis, basically about Canabalt. Have you played the Commodore 64 port?
Yes.
And did you make that, or did
Only on
someone else make that?
emulator. Only on emulator. Someone else made it. There's actually two versions, and um, uh, and one of the versions has two different music tracks, I think. Or no, I think there's two versions, and then they each have different music. Um, but yeah, the Commodore 64 version that you can get a physical cartridge of, I ended up
Which is
working pretty
a
closely
crazy
with
idea.
them to just. Yeah, I have one. I don't have it here. It's in storage right now. But it was really. I actually got pretty emotional when it showed up. But uh, I helped design the sticker for the cartridge, and I designed the box art and the manual cover and stuff like that. Um, so I didn't work on the port itself, but I tried to do what I could to support the kind of graphic design around it. Um, and weirdly, the version that you can't get on a cartridge, the other port, which is also very nice, the music in it is by um, a guy that did the music for one of the games that inspired me to make Cannibal in the first place, which is an old indie game called Thrustburst, um, which almost nobody's played, but it's amazing. Everybody go play it. If you played Alone on iOS, Alone is very, very Thrustburst-y. Um, But yeah, the musician from Thrustburst, which is a game that I played and loved and inspired me to work on Gravity Hook and later Canabalt, the musician from that game is the one who did one of the C64 soundtracks. So whatever that means.
Hmm.
Uh,
So that kind of brings us around to kind of the makings of Finji. You were making your own games. You finally had a way to make money from games, which was new. And you're still doing work for hire. You kind of, as a company, alternate between them. I
yeah, this
believe.
is actually,
And by
we've
the way,
gone,
it's yourself and Becca, your wife, are the main people
yep,
at this point.
yep. And it's been, this is actually the longest we've ever gone without doing work for hire. It's been a little over 2 years. No, actually it hasn't even been that long. Uh, I guess it's only been like a year. Because I forgot we had work for hire in the middle of Overland still. But yeah, we do. We got pretty picky about who our clients are for doing contract and freelance work because there's definitely a work for hire trap that you can fall into, which is, oh hey, we don't have anything going on. Let's do some work for hire. It'll help us build up our skills and um, we'll make a little bit of money on the side, et cetera, et cetera. But it's way, way, way more complicated than that. There's opportunity costs. There's,
You're not working
what are
on
you
making
what are
something
you getting
strong.
good at? Like if you're just hired to work on part of a game, maybe you're focusing more on efficiency more than end quality, or the balance there isn't quite right, or so the only freelancing that we've been taking on for 3 or 4 years now is what we call turnkey game production, which is we make a whole game. So we're the designers and we're in charge of trying to take a client's sometimes very weird idea and turn it into something that we think is actually fun and actually has redeeming qualities and all of that stuff.
And so is that
And
is that so
and
you
that
get to
has a very
practice?
high budget,
Yeah.
ideally.
Does that mean you get
Uh,
to practice all the different elements? Design, execution, launching?
Yeah, we're involved in all the different parts, so we're not just doing one little piece of a project, and we only take the projects if they can pay for a substantial amount of internal work in addition to the cost that it takes to produce the project for
Okay,
us.
which is cool.
Uh, so that seems to be keeping us out of the normal like quicksand of doing contract work to try and keep your internal work going. But it's still, even then, it's been really tricky. Um, and there's been a couple of times on Overland where we've opted out of doing contract work because even that version of doing contract work or work for hire is too risky. Like there's too much, it's too easy to lose momentum on our main thing, even though in the long term it might produce more revenue, et cetera, et cetera.
So the main thing you're working on, Finji original game, is Overland at the moment. When did that
Yeah,
start?
late 2014. Wait, no, late 2013.
Sure. And
Uh,
was it just a couple of people, or did you have a whole team in place from the beginning?
just a very, very, very small team. So early 2013 is when we shipped our last iOS game, which was Hundreds. And then we had some pretty nasty, basically legal problems for almost the whole year. And so at the end of the year, as kind of a little bit of a celebration for surviving everything, we were looking at different prototypes or game ideas we had laying around and talking to people we wanted to collaborate with about maybe starting something new finally, because we were in the clear to do that. And we started one project that ended up being called Portico, which we later had to shelve, and that was with the programmer and musician who went on to be part of Night in the Woods. And the other project was something that at the time was called Left to Die, and we were collaborating with a programmer who was then local to Austin named Shay Pierce, and just trying to just kind of exploring options. There wasn't a big team. We treated it as a one-off contract project. So we had a fixed budget to produce a very small 2D prototype to explore gameplay possibilities on kind of a, what if we do a compact grid-based strategy game where you have multiple people in your squad and there's kind of a survival theme. And we kind of
This is what eventually became Overland.
Yeah. And we worked on the 2D version of the prototype on and off for about 6 months, and then we staffed up a little bit to hire a full-time artist and audio person, and went into production in the middle of 2014. But we were still doing contract work through basically the middle of 2015.
And it's kind of been full-time from then on?
Yeah, and there were parts of it that were full-time before that also, but it's been very, very full-time for almost I guess 9 months now, something like that, a little over a year.
It's like maybe sometime this year-ish?
Actually, we're doing the first public
I saw that very soon.
Limited release in about 14 minutes.
Wow. Okay, let's keep going. You just gonna flick a switch there, and we can all of us get the live.
Pretty much. We'll see how many things break. We only had one. Somebody found a leak last night and bought 7 copies of the game before we plugged it.
Hey, that's good. So weird. Your game is so in demand. People are hacking in to buy it. Amazing.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, it was a pretty wide hole, but all right. Nothing's gone wrong on Twitter yet. We're good.
But it's pretty unusual for people to care that much. So you're doing the right thing. I mean, I've heard about Overland for a long time, and I'm really looking forward to it.
We're very invested in the game in many ways. This is by far like the largest project that has my ideas in the middle of it, but it's also this is the first time that we built a team almost entirely out of people that we blind hired. Usually all my teams were friends, basically. Mm-hmm. So Overland team is, depending on how you measure it, anywhere from like 60 to 80% women, and none of whom I ever worked with before except Becca, obviously. So our art director, animator, and our sound designer are all women from different parts, from, I guess, mainly from LA and Austin, who I never have worked with before and who have never shipped a commercial game before.
And that's something you called out, I remember, when you were hiring. You specifically said basically a call for diversity, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and like a lot of that is just trying to do, like, it's just kind of like insurance against me being like a boring dude who loves 80s horror movies, basically. Like, I think I feel like it's very challenging for me to deliberately introduce really cool or surprising high concepts or visual features or things like that. Like, it's a struggle for me because my no matter how much weird stuff I read or how many weird movies I watch, like I'm drawing so much from the same influences and inspirations as a lot of other people who are my age with my background. So yeah, at the most basic selfish level, it was like, what if we hired younger people who come from different backgrounds who care about different things so that at some fundamental level, the thing we're producing looks and feels different from other things.
And are you seeing that in Overland? Are you feeling like weird ideas are getting in there from the whole team?
Yeah, and I don't think it's happening at a very high concept level, because I think the high concept for Overland is like, what if we made a good strategy game that wasn't super hard to play? So like it's not, not necessarily like an art game or whatever, but I think sound design and the visual design is, I think it really stands out. I don't think there's anything particularly comparable out there, or if there are, there's only a couple of things, and it's because they have, um, you know, kind of thoughtful art directors that are trying to achieve the same stuff.
I particularly like your visual design. I've heard you describe it as iconic, which struck me
Um,
really well. You know, like
yeah,
stand out, kind of, you can share a screenshot and it's almost a piece of art, which I
yeah,
thought was
that
cool.
was definitely a goal from really early on, and it's mostly all this was a thing where I was being like a just kind of a crappy art director, and you're just like, Heather, we need a look that's like really special. We need like a signature look, and like that's not a brief. Like that's
I did
not
that as well. It's okay.
actionable.
I want it amazing.
Um, yeah, yeah. Just do something good. Just do something really good that everyone will love. But that's what she did. Like she did this really early piece of artwork that we've put on the blog or something before, and it's sort of like there's like a stone arch, and there's a little bit of a grid on the ground, and there's like a road and a little car and a person. Um, and uh, she did that art really, really early on, and then we went and explored like 50 other possible ways of doing things, and ended up circling back to doing almost exactly, trying to make the game look almost exactly like that first piece of art. And I think we're approaching, or on the art complete levels, we've actually surpassed that. So the in-game presentation is a little bit beyond that initial piece of concept art now, which is pretty exciting. But yeah, it doesn't look like anything else. I think that there are definitely, there's a handful of things that'll remind people of, like there's definitely a little bit of the Square Enix Montreal team that does Hitman Go and Lara Croft Go.
Yeah,
I
as
admire
a
those
kind of
designers a
thing.
lot,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think Heather wasn't super familiar with those games and didn't come at the design inspired by those things, but I think it's one of these, like, trying to look at a set of problems and solve it, and the solutions just kind of end up being similar.
They have a similar kind of zoomed out, like looking at a little model railway
Yeah,
look.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so our thing was like, there's a bunch of things about that that I think are really cool, especially in Hitman Go, but they're also, that's part of the atmosphere of Hitman Go, is these like fancy architectural models and this um, like that, the idea of these pretentious architectural models being something that fits into the fancy um, targets worlds in the Hitman games, I think like ties it all together. And we've actually had to do a lot of work to try and make Overland's levels that are functionally dioramas not necessarily feel like uh, models or toys, but hopefully feel a little
More
bit
interactive.
more, yeah, well, a little bit more like uh, real or out of your control or something. I think there's often like a sort of power, like if you present something, you're like, here's a toy, there's an implicit power narrative almost in like, oh, I'm in charge of this toy and I'm in control of it. And in Overland, that's a really weird balance where we want people to feel like um,
That
comfortable with the things that they can control, but also have this sense of vulnerability, have a sense of danger, all of that stuff. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, it's been weird trying to navigate it, but we've gotten to a point where like if I have to take new screenshots for our press kit or for the website or something, I just load up the game and just hit the R key to refresh the level and just take a bunch of screenshots and upload them, and they all look neat.
That's
Um,
nice.
which is it took a long time to reach that point, but it's one of these like two birds with one stone things where I think it's really good for marketing, but it's also just good for the game. Like it's great as a player for every level to look neat and look interesting and have variety and to tell a story and all of those things.
Don't forget to disable that R key when you launch?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's I'm sure it'll be fine.
I have a question here from Dave and Kay related to Overland. How much pen and paper design did you guys do, or did you dive straight into implementation and iterating the engine?
We did. It was very like kind of leapfroggy. So the first version of the game was a whiteboard sketch and a pixel art mockup, and from there we made a digital version. But from there we made a paper version, and then we took the lessons from the paper version and put them back into the digital version. And there's code from that revised digital prototype that is still in the engine, for better or worse. The main problem we had to solve was, so one of the basic ideas behind Overland is to take a genre that tends to be very, very granular and try to make it less granular in certain ways. So
that's a tactics game genre?
Yeah, so if you look at something like XCOM or Final Fantasy Tactics or something like that, you usually have like, sometimes you have like a mana meter, and you have hit points, and you have tech trees, and you have these large grids, and you have terrain height that makes a difference, and you have weapon stats, and it's equipment stats, and so on and so forth, right? Like there's just this like enormous amount of information, and that's a challenge from a user interface perspective, but I think it's also a challenge from a kind of accessibility or quote-unquote onboarding perspective, because you have to kind of get people up to speed on all this stuff, and all that stuff serves a purpose. Like the thing that all that stuff does is makes, when it works well, it makes those decisions interesting. Like in XCOM, you're like, well, should I stand on this tile or on this tile? And you're looking at these huge clouds of information and trying to come up with the least bad decision moving forward. And that mental process of trying to find the least bad thing and trying to make an educated guess, I wanted that result, but I didn't want to produce that result by comparing these big nebulous clouds of science fiction statistics or whatever. And so we changed a bunch of things, and we had good working theories from previous prototypes and so on about how to achieve this, but it just makes a bunch of things super hard. It's really hard to do progress. People have an expectation of progress. That's an emotional need that they want met when they play, and you have to engage with that or address that in one form or another. And we were finding that really hard to do without a tech tree, without XP, without all of those things. Another thing that's really hard is
your travel mechanic linked to that? And I know so little about the game, but I presume
yeah,
if
we
it's a road
ended
trip, you need to
up
get somewhere.
addressing it in a bunch of different ways, and I think it's still under-addressed, and we have plans about how to keep. That's kind of like a work-in-progress problem right now. The other problem we had, though, was managing difficulty, where we had this really granular game where like there's 2 or 3 survivors and there's 2 or 3 monsters, and you're in this little cramped claustrophobic space, and that feels great. The problem was if you add a 4th monster, the game would become nearly impossible. If you add a 5th monster, it's actually impossible. And if there's only 2 monsters, the level's too easy.
Okay.
So there's no like wiggle room, or it was just really hard to do anything interesting with it. Like right away we're like, what happens if you play the game for an hour? Well, it should slowly get harder, and it would be like too easy for 1 level, perfect for 2 levels, and then impossible.
And then people get better at different rates, some people will...
Yeah, well, there'd be different things, but there was just a peak. There was like, it didn't matter how good you were, like the math was so stacked against you as soon as you tried to ratchet the game up beyond a certain point. And so the paper version helped us figure out a bunch of things. The main thing was that Overland has a really weird enemy respawn mechanic that I think turns some people off right away the first time they play it, but I think it works for most people. And so we're going to figure out how to make it work for everyone eventually. But basically, when you kill a monster, 2 more monsters appear in 2 turns.
Mm.
is more or less the rule. So what you get is this kind of feedback loop based around the violence that you decide to commit as a player. And that's been pretty effective.
That sounds interesting.
Uh,
I'm going to move us away from Overland for a minute because I actually really want to ask you guys about indie publishing, which you also do. So you partner with people to help them release their games. And you've done that for a few games already. Your next one, I guess, is Night in the Woods. It's coming soonish.
well, we actually have a mobile game that just came out called Journey of 1,000 Stars.
Cool.
And we also have a new mobile game that's coming out very, very soon. Oh, hang on. I'm just going to launch Overland real quick.
What's the URL for people here?
It's secret.
Oh, someone knew it somewhere.
If somebody's on the mailing list, then they'll have it.
That's probably what it was. Denman shared it with me yesterday, and I can't find it anymore.
And launched.
Nice. So now we're going to pepper you with questions while you work.
Good job.
That's right.
Yeah, so we're launching a really gorgeous mobile game, possibly on Thursday or maybe next Thursday, called Runaway Toad, which is by some of the Super Splatters team and a British Israeli illustrator named Nina Limarev, who has also never shipped a game before. There's kind of a thread going through our projects, if you notice. But yeah, Night in the Woods is the big one. That's coming out this fall, and that is being art directed by Scott Benson and co-written by Scott's wife, Bethany Hockenberry, who also has never shipped a commercial game before. Neither has Scott. And Night in the Woods is going to be so weird to market and sell and talk about and all of that stuff because and it's one of these good problem to have things for sure because it's a very pretty game, I think. Night in the Woods and Overland were actually the two real main Finji projects when we started doing our thing. We hadn't planned on taking on Panoramical or Feist or any of our Android clearinghouse work or any of that stuff. It was just going to be Night in the Woods and Overland, and the idea was to have these two very different but very striking, visually striking games because I kind of think that's a reality of commercial indie game making right now. But we wanted them to have these other values too, and I think the idea with Overland is it'd be visually striking but also have compelling board game-like gameplay, and Night in the Woods would be visually striking but have this really great story.
Okay.
And
so
the story has become phenomenal.
Just to repeat that, you think visually striking is something you must have?
I don't know if you have to have it, but it sure solves a lot of problems before they can even happen, I think. This is one of the weird long-term lessons from Canabalt, too, was even though Canabalt is kind of like dumpy 5-color pixel art, I think the game tends... Yeah, it has a style. It doesn't really look like anything else. And you can take a screenshot. If you need a good screenshot of Canabalt, it takes like 10 seconds or something. And Overland and Night in the Woods are both kind of configured with that as a commercial constraint. And I don't think all games need that.
That's a really interesting idea, though. A game where almost any random screenshot kind of works as a marketing material.
Oh, holy crap. You just sold 140 copies.
Nice.
All right. That's fine. Not freaking out.
And you're selling 500, right, to do a kind of closed beta? That's the general idea there?
Yeah. So this is we've been trying to figure out how we want to go about essentially publishing Overland, the game we're developing, and how to do it right. And it's got a lot of roguelike elements. So programs like Early Access seemed like a really good fit because it solves two problems, right? You can start getting the game out in front of an audience before it's done so that you can verify whether or not your design decisions are producing effects that you value and that you desire as a designer. But you can also kind of build hype, and you can make allies with people who will help fuel word of mouth in the long term. So there's kind of like another two birds with one stone thing. The problem that we were having is I think that a lot of the early access programs that are out there right now are not very flexible. Either it's too hard to push updates, or it is too hard to control access to like how wide this funnel goes. So
Yeah, like you
like
get hundreds of thousands of people, and then suddenly even just talking to them
or
becomes a
it
problem.
shows up in, like somebody jumps into the early access on a game that's almost done, like Darkest Dungeon a couple months ago or something, and maybe Steam pops up an ad on the side of the page that's like, you might also like this game, which is nowhere near as complete, and is
Yeah.
not ready. What we're trying to do is find a way. There's another two birds with one stone thing, which is artificial scarcity tends to increase hype/value for desirable things. Like that's a retail thing. But also, we're hopefully going to be limiting access to the game to the people who are not going to have their first impressions overly diminished by the game's current state. So in theory, there's a group of people whose first access to Overland, whose first experience with Overland will not be measurably worse now than 6 months from now, because they don't care about the UI polish that we're planning. They don't care about the new environment variety. They just want the gameplay, and they want it now, and that's what they value.
It's hard to find those people, though. I mean, that was
Yeah, and I
always
don't
the
think there's
promise of,
that many of them.
you know,
So we
that's the promise of Steam Early Access always was, you can iterate on your gameplay and get feedback, but it's not always the case.
exactly, and there's not necessarily a lot of um, sort of filtering, and I think it can be really hard to communicate because Steam Early Access page is identical to a Steam not early access page except for like this one blue box.
And they promote them in the same
Um,
place. They're right up there, with the top page banners on the front page of Steam.
yeah, exactly. So I think there is a kind of um, I think there are expectations that are being set there that are really hard to meet, and my concern was that if we went one of those traditional routes, that there would be people who would be jumping in to play the game who would have a significantly better experience if they had waited.
Yeah.
Uh, and so we're running our program off of Steam, and currently accessible only through a mailing list of, hey, somebody saw this trailer or they played the game at a conference or something, and they really liked how it looked, and they really wanted to get in on it, or they really wanted to start streaming it. And we're going to try that. And if we really massively screw something up too, we kind of only got 500 customers. I can individually email people and be like, hey, we underestimated blah, 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 or we did X, Y, and Z wrong.
Yeah, it's manageable.
Yeah, it feels a little less scary. And we get to start getting feedback from people, and so I just kind of see it as like it's just this next weird step in tuning and producing the game to function the way that we hope it will for as many people as is reasonable to expect. It's definitely not a game for everyone still. But
And I guess this is also still a bit of an experiment for you. You're trying this out. Does this work, for future games?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good, like, we would never do this for Night in the Woods. It makes no sense for how that game is built and what that game is like. But I think for games that normally are participating in Steam Early Access, I think this is a pretty good alternative for a lot of them.
Yeah,
Um,
I would certainly
like I feel like I have a lot of control over what's going on right now, and that's
I would
definitely a
certainly
relief.
much rather do what you're doing right now. Because I also feel you can kind of use your launch up on early access. Because like maybe you have
Mhm.
a good early access launch and loads of press write about you and loads of players play your game. Lots of those people, both players and press, won't come back when you launch. That's scary.
Yeah, you can frequently get this impression of like, wait, is it actually out yet? Or um, uh, that definitely happened with Desktop Dungeons.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, uh, yeah, I think my goal at this point would be so far I really like running this on our own terms. And I want to try and do this for as long as possible and then go on these wider platforms when we're 100% ready and we're like super confident that what we're launching is going to meet people's expectations that their first experience with the game will be like really positive and
That seems
satisfying and all that good stuff.
that seems like a really good approach. I'm just going to kind of move over to Finji chat for a second. Dave McCabe has a good question. He says, Adam, I too work with my wife on games. We were wondering if you could briefly mention how you guys stop work bleeding into everyday life. So, like working too long, talking about projects when you're not meant to be working, that kind of stuff.
um, uh, it's difficult. Uh,
And related to that, how'd you get a like work-life balance?
yeah, so I guess I,
Dave,
I wouldn't count this as advice. I don't think I'm very good at this still.
Dave said that sort of sums it up, and I think it was to you just going.
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. I mean, the things I can say for sure that help us mess up less. One is having enough discipline to stick to some kind of schedule goes a long way. Uh, Being able to recognize when you have to deviate from that, but agreeing ahead of time to like some kind of time limit, like, hey, next week is going to be terrible. Are we both signing off on next week being terrible? I think doing that sort of thing helps a lot. And then saying, yes, I'm signing off on next week being terrible, but after that, we need to go back to the normal schedule. That kind of thing helps an enormous amount. Just being communicative in general helps a lot. The other thing for me is trying to, I don't know if this is just semantic or not, but at some point I read something about trying to achieve like work-life satisfaction more than work-life balance. Um, and I don't know if it's actually a better way of doing it or not, but to me it feels sometimes more helpful to feel um, like I have a really hard time like if I'm trying to interrogate my own practices and processes. So if I'm trying to say like, do I have good work-life balance right now? I actually think it's really hard to um, break that down into component problems. But if I'm asking myself, am I satisfied with how work is going? And am I satisfied with how the rest of my life is going? Those are kind of like questions that you can begin to formulate a response to and start to think about how can I address problems that are popping up here. I think, anyway. I don't know if that's too self-helpy or not. Uh,
It's a pretty good answer.
but
I imagine a hard problem that you're just going to keep trying to.
Yeah, I will say having kids didn't help.
I was gonna say
It's
having kids forces you to,
yeah.
apportion
It's kind
time.
of amazing in a I had I had no idea how much time I was not using. Uh, and I do know now, so that's kind of interesting. Like, definitely passed through some kind of weird, like, uh, I don't know, veil of existence or something. But uh, it gets real tight. Like, there's lots of places where you could be lazy, I think, about having a schedule, or you could be sloppy about discipline, or you could um, uh, oh, I messed up my schedule this morning. I'll just stay up all night and finish my work, and then I'll just sleep in late tomorrow. Like, you just can't do that at all anymore, ever again.
No.
So you do get a little more militant about um, kind of staying on your own case, I think, which uh, I like that. I feel like, oh, I'm more productive and more efficient now, or I feel like I'm making better use of my time generally, and I feel really satisfied about that. So that's been like an actual like work-life satisfaction thing. Like, my life satisfaction has gone like way up because I feel like uh, I have no downtime. I am like maxing out. The only problem is maxing out all the time, which is kind of stressful.
Okay. I'm aware we're kind of gone over the hour here, so I'm gonna try and wrap up shortly. I just have one question for you around publishing, partnering with you guys. How, let's say someone here listening is working on a game that's amazing. How should they pitch that to you and see, should you collaborate? And what kind of things are you looking for? And why should anyone,
Oh,
partner with you?
yeah. So there's I have a blog post somewhere on I think on the Finji blog, maybe, about working with publishers that totally applies to us as well as, I think,
A great
other,
blog post. I've shared that before. I'm going to find it here.
yeah, just here, publishers and you.
And you, yes. I'll paste that
Yeah.
into the chat here.
Yeah, so I would say that's like the long version of my answer for sure. Right now, we are so overcommitted that we are not collaborating on anything right now. But generally, kind of what we're looking for is, I guess I would say, I don't think it's a coincidence that like almost all of our projects have a pretty distinct through line. Um,
Tree line?
the, the there's like a thread that goes through everything.
Okay.
Almost every game that we've published in a major way, so Feist, Panoramical, Night in the Woods coming soon, Runaway Toad, Overland. I think all of these games are they're visually striking. The gameplay has been very carefully considered, and there's not much in the way of unnecessary extra parts stuck on here and there. They tend to be, even if they're not minimalist in their presentation, they tend to be minimalist in their construction in one way or another. They tend to be visually striking. They tend to be composed of relatively diverse teams. Usually, most of the team hasn't shipped a game before, and I think that tends to contribute to the game being both visually striking and feeling like something new or something that hasn't really been done before. And so like we don't have like a checklist thing. Like
But that's the
I
kind of
think
common thread of
the
what
game
you...
that we're most interested in publishing right now is basically a Zelda clone. So like we're definitely flexible and have our own kind of personal tastes and personal interests, but um, these are this is the type of game that if we don't publish, I am so excited to play and experience myself anyway that I find it very easy to support the game. I find it
Okay.
very easy to help market the game.
So it's not really
Um,
work. Is that the secret? That stuff you just
Yeah,
can't
I
get
mean,
excited.
sometimes it totally is, but it's so much easier to do when I am really passionate about the thing that we're working on. Um, and I think this is true for any and all publishers too. Like you want to find somebody who loves your project almost as much as you do, if not more, so that they will. It's just like it's so much easier to talk to people about the project when all of those things are true. You can go to intimidating press or industry figures or whatever, and they'll be like, well, tell me about this game, and you will be so naturally enthusiastic and so excited about it, and you have all of this incentive to put thought and effort into how to quickly describe the game and what is the fastest way to sort of simulate the experience of playing the game so that other people can understand how cool it is. Like, um, I don't know. That's kind
So,
of the sweet spot, I think.
sometimes it's a little easier to do that for someone else's game, to really gush.
Yeah, but it gets weird too because I think people get kind of suspicious about it. Like I feel like I get a little more pushback from press
As
when
a
I'm
publisher.
gushing about someone else's game than when I'm gushing about my own game.
It's interesting.
Which to me is weird because like gushing
Yeah.
about my own game is 100% more self-serving. Like,
And is a thing you have to get over as a developer. You have to get over the fact that you
yeah.
have to push yourself, which is outside America isn't the default. Certainly in Ireland and the UK, it's more usual to be really self-deprecating
Oh, right, right. Yes,
culturally.
totally. Yeah.
But
Yep.
it's kind of just something you have to get over or force yourself past.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be true. Like, I don't know how much of it's addressed in the article, but other people have talked about this too. But when you're showing a game to a publisher or partner or someone you want to collaborate with, there's lots of normal kind of best foot forward practices out there. But um, it definitely hurts if it definitely doesn't hurt if you are also pretty pretty clearly passionate about the project. Um, I think there's almost nothing that I'm less interested in than an email that opens up that says, we've got a very financially promising game in this genre, and we've been working on it for almost 2 months, and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's no, I'm not super excited by any of that, but when there's, when it's, hey, we started working on this thing, and we were working on it in secret, and it's a story about the town where I grew up, and uh, it has this really kind of idiosyncratic art style, and I don't know, like so those things start to stack up, and I start to feel like I'm working, like I want to feel like I'm working with somebody who hopefully won't have to take any risks to finish the game, but like the game is really important to them, like important enough that they would take risks for it, almost. Not
Yeah.
in a creepy Alex St. John way, like just in a like, because then I know that they're making games for the same reason that I'm making games, which is like they just have to build this thing, and like they need help to do it.
I've certainly recommended you guys to a couple people. It'll be interesting to see how you
Yeah,
guys
and
come out with in future. I'll
yeah,
kind of.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was actually gonna start wrapping up. So say what you were
Oh
gonna
yeah.
say.
Oh yeah. I was just gonna say that I think I would. I don't know what we're gonna be doing in the future. So like the goal. This is another one of these like design things. Like if we back up a step, like the goal of our publishing isn't actually to publish games necessarily, but it's to try and find a way to, um,
Diversify.
well, kind of like a way to help people, to help games that kind of just might not reach their audience.
Okay, that's cool.
Um, like I think Night in the Woods would have had trouble shipping for a variety of reasons. If we weren't involved, I think we helped Feist reach a little bit wider audience. Panoramical definitely just wouldn't have come out. Um, and we've been able to help Runaway Toad a lot with building up a relationship with Apple and all of those things. And like that's the thing that I value in those projects is it's like, hey, here's a way that we can use our existing resources to like as like a multiplier on somebody else's cool project that I wish I was working on. That's kind of like the goal, and I'm pretty suspicious that there are a bunch of different ways to achieve that goal, and I don't know if the way that we're doing it right now is the best way or not. So this is kind of like an experimental year in a lot of ways where we're going to be kind of like doing this stuff and seeing how it pans out and trying to figure out if this is like the maximum effective thing or not. Because there's lots of upsides. There's lots of ways that this scales really well, and there's some other ways that it doesn't scale really well. And so, I don't know. We're definitely going to keep doing things like this. I just don't know exactly what flavor they're going to be.
That's a really nice point about kind of experience and efficiency, that you're taking this thing you've spent years and years building up to and applying it for other people. You know.
Yeah, and it mostly works great, I think. There's just like, there's an unavoidable attention split between projects, though, that I think for the last year or two has been more detrimental than beneficial for me. But I don't know.
Really interesting. I have one last question here from Sergio Calabria. He's asking, when are you and Becca and family moving to Ireland?
Brenda made a pretty strong pitch.
Yeah, so Brenda and John Romero moved here last year with their family and their game dev studios. So we'll welcome you with open arms.
It was pretty darn appealing. But I think we're actually, well, actually I can't say what we're doing because we have to make an official announcement.
Cool.
We're not moving to Ireland, sadly, but yeah, we fixed our housing problem. So this may be the last time that anyone sees our spacious temporary office.
Next time we call you, you'll be on your houseboat or something crazy.
Yeah, our airship.
Yeah, in international air waters. Cool. So I'm going to wrap up there. I've already kept you way longer than I should have. Thanks so much for giving us your time.
Sure.
Really appreciate it, and I think everyone here got a lot out of all this. I had way more questions, but we'll leave them for another time. Thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah, I hope it was helpful or something. And if anybody has any follow-up questions or anything, feel free to send me an email. It might be a few days. We have there's a LGBTQ con here this weekend where we're sponsoring the arcade, so we're going to be super busy until basically early next week, but I'm usually pretty responsive through email.
So that's on fingy.co. If you go there, you'll find Adam's email. Thanks so much, Adam. We'll end it there.
Thank you, man.
Take care.
You too.